Hello and welcome to Dell's Gaming, and this is from the Depths designer, and in this episode I'd like to go through, it's not quite a how-to or a build, it's a how-to carrier, and I thought I'd do a video on potential of carriers in game for two reasons. One, there was a forum thread that just asked, but also put in a post about potential changes for ammo and ammo producers. So the idea was, or currently your average ammo box contains about 100 ammo and also produces a small amount of ammo over time, and your ammo processors convert resources into actual ammo and stores it in the boxes. So you've got two types. They do it quicker than the ammo, but it costs resources. The idea I think that was put forward, I quite like this idea, is that the ammo boxes capacity would be increased significantly, but they would no longer produce any ammo whatsoever. Now this would mean that your ships would have to either produce ammo using the ammo processors. There may be some other type of ammo producing system which is more efficient but has some other limitations, potentially something which is based in a fortress. Maybe think of like fuel, where basically you have the fuel producing factory, etc., at your base, and then you have to ship your fuel to the ships. Maybe we'll have to do the same for the ammo, but you know, you'd still have some cheap way but not necessarily efficient way of producing ammo. So this sort of got me thinking, well, what about then using carriers? Because you could separate the ammo suppliers and producers from the attack ships. So it sort of gives a it's not necessarily the best way of doing it, but it would work in theory. So this is about what I think is potentially possible, what changes need to happen in the game in my view, to make it more viable and to make the auto supply system work a little bit more effectively. So first of all, I think there is basically two ways of doing carriers, the actual carrier system themselves, as a supply ship. Now the first one isn't really what I class as a carrier. It's sort of, basically you build a big ship which goes close to the enemy with the other ships and just supplies the ships around it. But what you effectively would be building is a big battleship with some support ships. So it's not really a carrier, it's just, it would supply the ammo to the frigates and destroyers, example, that going into battle, but it would stay close to the combat. The second type is the more traditional carrier, which doesn't actually attack the enemy themselves. All of their attacks is done via the ships which they produce and or launch, and they try to stay away from combat as much as possible. And all their attacking is done via the aircraft, or it could be small ships. It doesn't have to be aircraft. The carrier could also create small ships in this area, but anyway, we'll say aircraft, traditional, helicopters, could be anything, and it supplies all the ammo, fuel, energy for those ships which are actually doing all of the damage. There is a potential for in-between hybrid, which has got some damage potential, but most of it is done via the aircraft. So I have got a couple of ships which I have they're adaptations of current vessels just to show what is potentially possible for carriers. So first of all, we'll look at the traditional sort of carrier. So this is my US Independence sort of clone. So this is based upon the Cleveland hull. So it's quite a long hull, 118 meters, and basically, as you can see, I've taken all the superstructure off and all the guns and put a flight deck on there. Now, it's not very wide flight deck, and it's only got lots of various 40mm defences and some anti-missile defences. There is no big guns on this ship at all. Armour, the hull has the same armour as the cruiser, which is basically light alloy, some oblique and shielding, but that's about it. There's no additional armour. The flight deck's not armoured, and below the second level has a bit of armour. There's some heavy armour around the AI and ammo resources. On this ship, a couple of primary bits would be your ammo needs to be increased, because it's now not just supplying ammo to itself, it's going to be producing ammo for all of the vessels in its range of supply. So it's now got 4 ammo depots, whereas the original one had 2, and it's not going to use much ammo because most of the guns are fairly just simple guns. They're not going to really use much ammo. The other one is resources. There is a lot of various dotted around resource containers. I could put a lot more. There's still plenty of empty spaces to put more, but the resources have 2 effects. Having lots of resources. One, you can spawn lots of aircraft using the vehicle spawners. You can also repair lots of your damaged aircraft. Also, it increases the area of your repair resource zone, shall we say. So if I go into the map and press R, so this circle, which is the area in which I can resupply other vehicles, is defined by the I believe this is true, by the total amount of resources on the ship, not the current amount, but the capacity. So as your capacity goes down, that circle will get smaller. Currently that's about I think that's nearly 2,000 meters away. So any vessel within 2,000 meters would get supplied by the ship here, and it does keep some of the supplies, but a lot of ammo and etc. is all given away to any ship which is aircraft etc. which is doing the attacking. So that's one way of doing it. There is another sort of in-between ship. So this is my version of the HMS Eagle with a few changes. The original ship, the HMS Eagle, was based originally on a battle cruiser that was being built for, I think it was the Chilean or one South American country. It was then taken over and they produced an aircraft carrier out of it, but the actual main hull was a battle cruiser with all of the associated armour etc., or lack of it. It was one of the first sort of, it wasn't purpose built, but it had a fly through deck. Now the only difference here is I've kept the big guns. So the only difference here is I've kept the big secondary guns, and also I kept a nice big front gun as well. This is also quite well armoured. You can see there's a lot of armour here. The hull has the battleship style of armour with metal and stone etc. and air gaps in there, so it's got quite a bit of potential to stave off the enemy attacks. Downside of it is it's not quite as long as the Independence. Could be made longer, but for the cost At the moment it's still 200,000. I think the Independence without anything is about 150, but this has a length of about 118, and the Cleveland has a length of 180, which means it's got a longer flight deck. We'll go into why that doesn't really matter at all in a minute, but hey ho. The main bit is most of that cost on here is ammo. It's also got less resource potential and slightly less ammo potential, and also the ammo would be used by its own guns. The advantage is this is happier getting close to the enemy, so that's a potential for it. So next is, what are you going to use the aircraft carrier for? Well, obviously you're going to need some aircraft for the aircraft carrier, and here's a couple of examples which I just done for the Independence. These are their propeller steel based aircraft. They're about as good as I can get without really making them look weird and or being stupid. In some ways the key bits is they're small enough to be on the carrier, which again isn't necessary, but I wanted to do that. So this is my little version of the Hellcat, US Navy Hellcat. So it's got a speed of about 50 meters a second, and is basically gun armed, some cannons and with high explosive, and some sort of smaller, higher rate of fire guns, and it can take out, as example, and this is what you got to think of, it's got to defend your vessel against, in this case, aircraft of the white flares. It can take out, in a group of 3 or 4 of these, it can take up to a Surge or a Sparrow thruster. So most of the aircraft it will take out. It's only 9,000 resource points, so to go, and it's not a Surge, it's a Spike, that's the one. So 4 of these would be the equivalent of a Spike, and 4 of these will take out a Spike. The Spike is faster, but the 4 of them working together will take it out, and all of the lesser planes. When it comes to the thruster craft, they are starting to get quite big. So the early Sparrow, Wrecker, and the Dragon Claws to a degree, but the larger ones it would have a problem with. So that's the scaling of that aircraft. Now again, I have got some jet ones which I did in a previous video, but I've got on the Eagle, and they're similar. They're a little bit more expensive, but they have a similar capacity. They can take out all of the white flare aircraft and start taking out some of the thruster craft. So that will be your defense against aircraft, as well as obviously your own AA guns. Then I have, this is my version of the Avenger. Yeah, it does have a shield. I haven't, because it's going to be coming in close to potentially white flares, spamming it with lots of sabot rounds, so I put a reflective shield on. So this is a torpedo armed Avenger. It's got some rockets and also a nice large torpedo underneath as well, and basically again it goes around about 40, high 40s, without becoming silly size of propellers, etc. It's a little bit wider than the flight deck, so when taking off you have to ensure it doesn't intersect with the island, which is a minus point for this Cleveland based one, because it's quite a small flight deck. And again, with all its torpedoes, it can take out a lot of the ships of the white flares. And it has a problem. Again, the only one we haven't got here is something that can take out the large thruster craft, because they need some serious guns, and that's where you would need some escort ships. So the other key bit about all these aircraft is they have various control blocks. If I go into build mode, so to work with the carrier bases, you need to have these return back to the carrier to refuel and rearm. So on this one, it's got a control block here for the moment, which is set to, if the fuel gets below 25%, so 0 to 25%, then go into fleet mode. Now this is the hope that the carrier has the same fleet position as the ship, so sorry, as the plane, and to be honest, as long as it's within 2000, it will get refueled. So as long as it's heading roughly in the same area, we'll refuel, rearm and head out. Now you can also create a similar control block that looks at the ammo level and says when the ammo is below a certain level, then return back to the carrier. This is one of the first bits where in the current game there is a problem, and you'll have to make this work using a different battle tactics, shall we say, than normal, but we'll discuss that in a minute. So the idea being, if the onboard ammo, I have put ammo producers on this one, but let's say it didn't have those for some reason because they are too large or not efficient, once the ammo and or fuel got below a certain level, this would head back to the carrier, rearm, go back and attack. So similar to what would happen in a real carrier environment in many ways. So that it would be the idea. So that's how the processes would work. Final, not say final bit, but one other bit is, at the moment these are on a docking station, and I have built these to be the correct size for the flight deck, but in reality these aircraft don't have to have a runway, they don't have to have a flight deck. With these tractor beams, let me just bear with me 1 second, it's easier in build mode, I can move out. With these tractor beams, these settings can be anything up to 100 meters away, and you can have these vertically take off. They don't have to be facing down the deck at 90 degrees, just a little bit off of the deck height. You could set this up however you wanted to. So although at the moment on this aircraft I think I can get about 8 planes on the deck, theoretically I could get 80 if I staggered the whole distance and had them taking off vertically, etc. So you don't have to build carriers in a traditional format. You could build your carriers in to look however you would like, to be frankly honest, because it doesn't really matter with the tractor beam originally launching them. The other important part is, although you've got the carrier deck and loaded with aircraft, that's the initial flight of aircraft. The second stage comes in vehicle spawners. So a vehicle spawner, if we find one down here, here we go. So the vehicle spawner here can have set a default aircraft. So here we've got another Avenger. So all I've done is I've typed the path, including the folder. So these are all in a folder called air, and then the name, and you'll notice the tick comes up. How many spawns? So this is how many of these vehicles will it spawn at any one time. So the preserve means if I set that to 2, it means it will keep 2 of these aircraft in the current battle at any time. It'll also say what's the maximum I will create of these. I wish this could be higher, I must say, because it's annoying after a carrier battle with lots of little aircraft. Between battles this number gets remembered, and the only way to redo it is to either rebuild the ship, or you have to go through delete all of these and then retrofit so that they get rebuilt with back to zeros. Anyway, it'd be best if this was, you could optionally have this at 10, but it was set higher. Anyway, the maximum lifetime is, it does stop it if you've got some reason they're getting destroyed as soon as they get built, it stops it just wasting resources trying to build an aircraft for some reason. So there is a good reason for it, but I wish the lifetime spawn was higher. Some other points are self-evident. The distance, so the distance these spawn at, now it only produces the aircraft in one axis. You haven't got the azimuth and elevation like you have on the tracking beams. Personally, again, it would be nice to be able to put that elevation, and so I could build them so that they actually took off along the deck. I did build a ship with those at the back, and it looked really ugly because you had to build something up the top which pointed down to be able to build it wasn't nice, basically. It did work, but basically I had a big chunk of metal on the back pointing down. Again, if you're not worried about making something look realistic, that doesn't matter one iota. You'll be just launching them vertically, as many as you want. So this is how you how the vehicles are spawned. Now the other bit I have put in here is a number of control blocks which define when, because there's no point in just spawning aircraft and wasting resources. You might only want to spawn aircraft at certain times. So for example, this is one control, and so you've got 4 conditions and 1 action. So the action is to constructible spawners spawn the default vehicle within a particular range, so it only works on this one. The conditions, which with 3 slave conditions and the main one. So for this, because we're doing an Avenger, we would want to say, right, is our primary target a sea aircraft? Because if it's a flying vehicle as a primary target, there's no point in producing a torpedo bomber. Is the distance of the enemy 0 to 4,000 meters? That's basically just a check to make sure there is still enemy in the battle, otherwise that's not spawning in the aircraft. And this particular one uses the power of the aircraft to say what power of the aircraft. So if it's 0 power, there's no point in, or very low power, chances are you don't need many bombers, so it won't produce any extra ones. There's another one at the back here as an example, and this has a higher power setting. So basically the way these work is it will produce 1 Avenger here as standard, spawn that. If the ship has a power above 5,000, it will produce a second one, and if it's above 20,000, it will produce a third one. And you could keep going with that, or set these to spawn more than one, you know, as it goes through. So they also have a limit, so they only work every 60 seconds, so they won't work immediately. That stops it spawning too quickly if I set that high, so it will give the ship a good 60 seconds to see whether it gets destroyed, needs a new one, etc. So that's how I spawn the aircraft. And at the front we've got a few which are these are ones are for the Hellcat, and they just say, as an example, is there an enemy whose altitude is 100 to 300 meters? So this is a low altitude fighter, and there is ones for high altitude. So is the enemy altitude within 300 to 600 meters? So this produces a high altitude version of the Hellcat. So that's how how to spawn aircraft in once you're in battle, and using control blocks to be able to set as many definitions as you want to define how many aircraft you spawn, which type of aircraft you might want to spawn. Here I've got 2. Other ships I've had as many as 4 types. Sometimes I might have an anti-submarine version of the Avenger, as an example. That was an idea I was having. So I could say, okay, if the altitude of the target is below, say, -10 meters, then produce a anti-submarine warfare version, or it could be an ASW helicopter. You know, you've got quite a bit of fun you can have with different ships to bring in, sorry, aircraft to bring in as part of your carrier fleet. The final part then is I was talking about having a slightly different battle tactic with this aircraft, and this is where there is a problem where you can work around it, but you know, it would be better. That's around fleet mode, combat mode, etc. In that currently in a fleet, so when these craft are spawned in, they all spawn in as within this fleet. If you set up a fleet movement order, bear with me a second, so if I set this fleet mover order here up to go to that point. Now in fleet mode, all of the aircraft will go to that point. They won't stay with the flagship, they won't stay in formation, they will just head towards that point all individually and then just circle in that area waiting for the flagship. Once the flagship gets there, then they would go to the second point and the third point and the fourth, etc. Now how does this affect us with carriers? Well, let's say you've got a spawned ship is going to attack our area, we're going to say it's the resource zone. At the moment, when it goes to fleet mode, it's going to return back to this first waypoint area and not to where the actual ship is. So it won't return to formation, it will return to the fleet point. Now that's where you've got to have your tactics correct. So if for some reason the carrier has, maybe it's gone into combat mode and has run away, and it could be almost a square away or half a square, or you know, nowhere near the fleet point, the aircraft won't go to the ship, it will still just go to the fleet point. It would be better if there was a let's leave this as it is, give it a formation command. So return to formation. Return to formation would be go back to your assigned position relative to the flagship, not relative to the waypoint. That would be the perfect, if that was in game. Oh, I'd love that, because all my aircraft, I'd say, okay, when you're low in ammo or low in fuel, return to formation, which effectively would mean return to the ship. Now some will say, oh well, you can just say dock with the with your mothership. Yeah, that doesn't work for spawned aircraft. That only works for drone aircraft. So an aircraft which is a drone and has an assigned tractor beam, you can say dock and undock. You can't do that with a drone which has been a vehicle which has been created by the vehicle spawner, because it has no assigned tractor beam. Anyway, that's a minor bit. The way to get around it is, as I have done here, is before the battle, there's two stages to this. Before you actually enter battle, set lots of waypoint positions that the carrier is going to follow, and try to, you know, maybe circle the enemy, etc., in relatively small amounts, and keeping at the range you want your vehicle to keep. You could also just create a slightly different ways, create a waypoint there, join the two up, and now it will just patrol between those two waypoints. So the recovery point for the aircraft would either be point A or point B, and the carrier would be heading towards that. That would be another way to do it. Either way, you have to sort of semi-control that situation. The other bit to go in with that is you don't want the carrier disappearing off the other side of the map because it's trying to run away from incoming craft. Now, you want this to be defensive, but it can't run away from those fleet positions. If it runs away from the fleet positions, the aircraft will not be resupplied. So there is a couple of potential ways you can do it. One is don't have a combat mode for the carrier and it only ever stays in fleet mode, which could work. What I've done for the Independence is, first of all, it uses its speed. So if at the moment we're running around at 7 meters a second, when an enemy gets within about 1500 meters, it goes up to full speed, which will take it up to about 17 meters a second. But it will still be just going between the two waypoints, but it makes it a little harder to hit. I have then got a control block that says if an enemy gets within 750 meters, and to be honest, I may reduce that further to say 300-400 meters, then go into combat mode, and the combat mode is a runaway type of combat. It's basically going to be, as you can see here, go to 170 degrees, which is basically turn tail and run away as much as possible. It really wants to be around the 1000. Yeah, it just wants to get away from the enemy, no matter what. Then once it's spawned in some more aircraft, destroyed that local enemy, you know, its guns have done its job, etc., then there's another little control block that says, in this case 800, could be less. Once the enemy's no longer within a minimum range, go back to the fleet point. So that's the control system which is potentially possible, and the way I would use it. But it would be nice if and I'm only having to do that because we're having to use fleet move to ensure ships come back to the initial position. So now it is time to try a little fleet battle with the carrier. So we're fully loaded up with 3 torpedo bombers and 4 fighters, and the couple of Clemsons out there are set to stay close to the carrier by only going to combat mode when an enemy is within about 500 meters or so. So most of the time they're going to stay fairly close. We've also or I have created, you can see, lots of small waypoints so that the distance they're going to go to on the system, let me just bring this up, you can see that they are actually trying to go to the next waypoint, not necessarily stick with the ship. One should be ahead, one should be behind. Their speed in normal mode is about the same, so they'll stay with us. If an enemy gets close, they all go up to about 17-18 meters a second, so again they will stay relatively close to the carrier in most cases. There's a potential for a bit of separation, but it shouldn't be too bad with any luck. So for this battle I have turned off my avatar giving away materials to the ship, so we're just going to have the 216,400 resources which are on board the ship to see how it can perform and battle against some white flare ships. So first of all, let's go up against some aircraft. So if I bring in one of each type up to expert level, and a thruster craft, we'll bring in a Sparrow and a Wrecker. I know the other ones it will have problems with, so we won't bring them in at this moment. So yep, there with the fighters launching away, and then the bombers just after it, and it's already building some more fighters because obviously we've got aircraft to go up against, so the spawners are producing more ships. Our guns are defending ourselves a little bit against the enemy, so our AA guns will be working away. And anti-missiles, and our Clemsons are acting again as a little bit of a picket duty, defending us against the various ships. Again, they'll be using their AA guns and anti-missile defences to help us out. And it's because of some high level, I think, or low level aircraft, it's producing a couple more fighters. So we're going to have 4 fighters in total coming in here in short period, I believe. So it takes a while to build the aircraft. I could put some more remote tentacles in. They are quite expensive though. This battle isn't about watching my aircraft, it's about how the carrier performs. So, that aircraft got off at just the wrong time. But it's close to the carrier and will get rebuilt pretty quickly, although, yeah, not in that state. So because of the aircraft are quite close, we have gone into a combat mode, but once the aircraft are a little bit away, it will start heading back to the fleet move. At the moment they're still a little bit close. Our fighters are making their way around. I don't know which ship they're actually aiming for at the moment, but you can see them as a group in the background there. They are trying to focus down on a few of the enemy ships at least. So the Hellcats are heading back to the carrier at the moment, I think primarily to help out against the enemy aircraft attacking us. And it looks like they're coming in against that Sparrow, which is exactly what we want, or I want happening, is them coming around here. And our carrier is still trying to avoid the Sparrow because it's very close. It's going to be in its runaway mode. That's the a downside of the map. I suppose I could put something to say, if it's an aircraft that's close, don't run away. Only run away if it's a ship which is very close. That's a potential change I could put in there and would maybe recommend. Now you can see it's going to try and head back to its waypoint because that aircraft has been taken out. And obviously because we're close to the carrier, it's going to be refueling and rearming all of those fighters so they can go out and once again take on the enemy fighters or enemy aircraft. This was the whole fleet formation issue, in that, as you can see, just trying to get away from that aircraft, the carrier has got a lot way away from the waypoints. So although it's making its way here, some of the aircraft are going to be circling around there, and I think our 2 destroyers are waiting at the next waypoint. But ideally I would like them to be in formation with the carrier. And now that the enemy have actually now been removed, all of the ships which were docked using docking stations are now returning to the ship. Hopefully they won't cause any problems. Sometimes when docking the aircraft they tend to catch a little bit and damage themselves, should we say. And resource wise we're down to 161, so we only used what would we at 216, so we used about 50,000 resources on some of the spawned aircraft, but we can get that back now because we can go into this mode here, and the aircraft which were not which were spawned in basically, which are waiting over at this waypoint over here for the aircraft, because that's where they're waiting for. What we can do is basically scrap them. So the Clements actually picked up the resources from our scrap ships and spread it around the fleet, and we're back to 213,000 resources. So theoretically, apart from some fuel, that only cost us 3,000 resources if you work out also picking up some from the enemy, although there's still a bit of scrap to pick up. I think overall we actually did a profit on that. Let's go against some ships just to show the bombers getting brought in. So we're bringing a charger to show the what's happening coming in close. We'll go retaliator. I think that may be a bit too much. Ripper and say a thresher. That's quite a lot of quite a lot of ships there. So this is quite a heavy test. And again, our aircraft launch off, and we're already building another Avenger here. The Thresher's quite a high-powered ship, so we should get a few Avengers built in this time. And our fighters and bombers actually managed to take out all of the small ships. They didn't even get close in this particular case, and now they're working over the Thresher with hopefully torpedoes and rockets coming in. I don't think we got anything else actually destroyed, so in this particular case it worked quite well. They certainly took out any enemy. Anyway, the idea of this isn't really a combat test, it's just to show some theories how it works. Luckily the Thresher is further enough away. Our Clemsons are staying with the carrier to a degree. Oh, you can see it's actually obviously had a few torpedo hits by the looks of it. So anyway, this is how to carrier. Yes, it does work. There is a few changes you could make to this. I mean, you could put some missiles on it. You still need some support. It still comes down to how good your aircraft are that you're going to spawn on the carrier, but running a carrier does work. I might add this to the US Navy fleet, or as a second carrier task force, which is slightly back from the main bombardment fleet, so it actually does work at range. Something like that. We'll see how I feel like. And again, it's all enemies all got destroyed and our aircraft are returning. Any comments? Obviously put down in the comments below. Must we make a jet powered aircraft or use the Eagle with some of my jets as well, just as a slightly different one? But I think this will do as an initial US Navy, US independence style carrier with some, although a little bit archaic, still functional aircraft. You're coming in a little low. Wave off, and oh, I thought that was gonna crash in there, but no, it's he was okay. I thought he'd have to wave off on that particular landing. Another Avenger coming in. They're coming in a little close, but it's sort of working. Anyway, I do like seeing them come in back into the ship. It looks a little bit weird on occasion, but it sort of works. Any comments, as I've already said, leave down below. But as always, keep playing the game and have fun.